Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Today, I conduct a conversation with an Israeli conductor who not only conducts, but is also an international piano soloist. He founded the Sudama ensemble in New York, and in 2013 he founded the Geneva Camerata, where he's been music and artistic director ever since. It's a real pleasure to welcome David Greilsammer. David, it's wonderful to meet you, to see you, and to speak with you. I can see through the powers of Zoom that you're in a cityscape. Where are you, and what are you doing there?
So I'm in Hong Kong, and right now I'm doing my mandatory quarantine for 14 days. But thankfully, once this is done, I can go back to performing some real concerts for live audiences, which is really great these days. And I have a solo recital, piano recital, and then I'm making my debut with the Hong Kong Philharmonic as conductor and pianist, and conducting some very cool program.
Brilliant. I can think of worse place to be stuck in a hotel room and having food delivered. I'm imagining the food is pretty good.
It's not bad, and I love Asian food, and I love spicy food, so I'm very happy. Everything's good.
Well, the last thing we'll talk about before we finish the episode will be food, so we'll come back to that later. With everybody, I go back to the beginning and ask you, do you come from a musical family? How did music first enter your life? Was it a shock to your parents? How did music first enter your world?
Actually, both of my parents are amateur musicians, not professional, but music has always been part of their lives and therefore our family's life. So actually, before I was born, when my mother was pregnant, she had this idea in her mind. She had decided that her first son would be a pianist, not necessarily a professional pianist, but it just, she was an amateur pianist herself, and it never quite worked out. So I think it was kind of a very ancient dream that she had. So when she was pregnant, she made that decision, and she actually went ahead and bought a piano before I was born. So I kind of had no choice, I guess.
Yeah.
When I was 6 years old, I started piano. My parents were, pushing me, but not at all in a kind of severe way. They're just, incredible music and culture and art lovers, and we are a very musical family. I have 4 brothers. We are 5 boys altogether, and everybody's playing some kind of an instrument, either professionally or not professionally, but music has always been there. It's very important for all of us, and it was a very, very loving, very warm environment for becoming a musician.
Well, you made me think, actually, when you were talking about your mum and before you were born. I was expecting you to say that, she practiced the piano for hours and hours and hours whilst you were still in the womb, hoping that it would transmit across.
No.
No. I do remember with our first child, Emily, I used to tap on my wife's pregnant belly, rhythms like Ravel's Bolero and Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, which maybe is why she went on to be a very good percussionist. I don't know, but
that's interesting. That's very interesting.
I have no idea. So the piano for you, predestined, it seems. Studying at home in Israel. At some point, you moved to New York and went and studied at the Juilliard. Was that a big wrench leaving home? What made you go to the Juilliard?
Well, I grew up in Jerusalem, in Israel, as you mentioned. And when I was 18 years old, as with all youngsters in Israel, had to go to the army and serve, the mandatory service in Israel for a few years. So, when you go through that And obviously you cannot really practice your instrument as you would like during your military service. It's a difficult period. And at the age of 21, when I finished my military service, I was kind of at a personal crossroad in Israel, and I really wanted to finally develop, study, go out, and it was the right time. So to answer your question, it really felt like the right thing to do, to travel. It had been my dream to go to New York. I had never, really had the chance to travel to New York and to start any kind of major studies. So it was a very big deal for me. And of course that the kind of culture shock between, I had just finished my military service after these, very intense, complex years. And very soon after, just a few months later, basically found myself at the Juilliard School starting studies in this incredible, renowned conservatory. So the contrast was unimaginable, really unique. But it is what contributed also, I think, later on to my wish to, always undertake kind of unusual projects and projects that are not the obvious ones, projects that have risk-taking in them, because I learned a lot from that period. If you are in an intense period of your life and you dream about certain projects, you just at some point you just go for it and you make it happen. So this period taught me a lot, actually, and I remember it as, I actually remember my period in the army as a very interesting, enriching period of my life.
I would imagine you did a lot of thinking away from the piano.
Exactly.
Artistic thinking, because when you're learning an instrument, like any instrument, you become obsessed with the minutiae of it, with the technicalities and the technical aspects of it. And to a degree, you stop thinking about artistic visions and plans.
Absolutely. And I would even go further and say that, I know it's going to sound very cheesy, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's only in those times that you are, being taken away, this thing that you love so much, that you truly realize how much you need it. I have to say, I started music when I was 6. It was always there, all my life. And then suddenly one day, you've never asked yourself this question: what happens when somebody takes that away from you? And that's it, it's gone. What happens? And when I went to the army, suddenly this happened for the first time. And it was the opportunity, just as you said, to finally think, where do we go from here? How much do I need it? How much is it necessary for my future, for my life, to have this, for my own personal development and life? And I realized that I really could not live without it, and that this is what I wanted to do. So again, this is why sometimes people ask me about the spirit. Was it difficult? I am very grateful for it, because just for that one thing of realizing how much I loved music and piano, it was a great moment.
Back to New York, and your first album is Play Conducting Early Mozart Concerti with Vanguard Records in 0405, which leads me to a question. Obviously, you were doing wonders as a pianist for somebody to want to record early Mozart Concerti with you, but you're playing and conducting, which means at any point before there, or at what point before there, did you think about playing and conducting at the same time? And did you have any lessons in it? Did you seek any advice from a conducting teacher? Did you even study conducting? Because I can't find any reference to it. What was your path to firstly play conduct and then obviously onto conducting?
Yeah, so a few things happened in that period. You know, I had already been in New York for quite a while, studying at Juilliard, and one thing is that this is the period that I truly realized my passion and my love for Mozart. I mean, it had always been there. I remember myself when I was a kid, 7 years old, my mom playing on an old LP disc, some Mozart piano sonatas, and me thinking, oh, this music is the most beautiful in the world. But I never quite realized it. And it's only my first years in New York, through a variety of activities, concerts, encounters with musicians, that I realized, wow, Mozart, that's something I really want to have a big part of my life. And I started playing pretty much all of the piano concertos in that period, studying them, being fascinated by Mozart's way of writing for orchestra, not just for piano. This was really my first door maybe to orchestral writing, to the symphonic world, the symphonies. I remember discovering the Jupiter Symphony in that time. I mean, truly discovering and studying the score. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. So what happened at the same time is also I started studying during my master's. I started studying conducting as well at Juilliard, kind of parallel to my piano studies. And at first it was, I completely did not mean to, become a conductor or anything like that. I was so busy with the piano. Being a pianist is already enough hours a day practicing. It's not like I was dreaming of something else. And as I was studying conducting during that time, I little by little I thought, how I would say how complementary it is to the piano. Piano is one thing, but then when you start studying conducting, you start being aware of colors, of harmonic thinking, of, I would say, landscape, what sounds truly represent. And I thought these early discoveries in the conducting world were truly revelations to me. I have to say, we all know, being a pianist is something very, very beautiful, but very solitary. I'm not talking, on a social, in a social way, solitary in the way that as pianists, we are always taught to be extra concentrated on our instrument. This is such a self-sufficient instrument.
Yes,
it's the king of the jungle of instruments, and the piano is an orchestra. A piano can do pretty much anything. So I think it's in the tradition. We are taught that pretty much, I'm going to say something awful and my piano teachers will hate me, but we are being taught that piano is just good enough. It's okay. We can do anything. And so as a pianist, you are so concentrated in your Chopin etudes, your Beethoven sonatas, Mozart piano concertos, Bach prelude and fugues. And you forget that there's a whole world out there that should be discovered. And this is what conducting started to represent for me in that period. And so when I finally had this opportunity, this first recording project, I felt, how do I bring together these two worlds that now have an important part in my life? And Mozart piano concertos was kind of the obvious and immediate answer to that. However, I had come to realize in those years that Mozart has a unique repertoire that nobody seems to be interested in, and that is the early pieces, all the pieces that he wrote when he was very, very young, because Mozart is always young, but really the early period, when he was 10, 11, 13, 14 years old, and he wrote some incredible music during that time that very few orchestras, string quartets, soloists play. And I I really fell in love with this music, and I thought, okay, this is the time. So I went ahead and recorded these 3 first Mozart concertos that to this day I still perform and I really love. And this was basically my first steps as conductor.
Who did you study with at Juilliard, or was it outside of Juilliard?
So we had at the time, I don't know if you know, there was this very famous conductor, old man named Otto Werner Müller, who was this great figure from German descent, of course, who was kind of the emperor of conducting in New York. And he had designated his assistant, a wonderful conductor, Nancy Allen. She was really the one, who was teaching conducting for non-conductors, basically, for pianists, violinists. But it was a very intense course, and I was completely kind of not ready for that, because, as I said, I started by just being very curious, and the course was very intense, and we had the chance to conduct ensembles, and we just, all the richness of the Juilliard School. And it was just an incredible experience at Juilliard.
So it sounds like, those conducting lessons plus recording the early Mozart concerti really got you into conducting and ensembles. And just a year or so later, in 2006, you founded the Sudama Ensemble in New York. An interesting word, Sudama. What sort of music did you perform in that ensemble? And were you already starting to put into practice some of those interesting projects you've been thinking about?
So first of all, I should explain Sudama is just Amadeus backwards.
So it is. Yes, I'm looking at it on the paper, and so it is. Yes, very, very good.
So actually it is with Sudama. This is the creation of Sudama and the recording kind of happened, in fact, at the same time. And my 2 Mozart recordings, because I have 2 recordings of piano concertos, one, the early piano concertos, and a much later one that I also did in New York. Both of them I was fortunate to do with Sudama. Basically, these were extraordinary chamber music partners from my years at Juilliard, musicians that I cherished and loved, that I had the chance to play concerts with, and it was just the opportunity to gather these wonderful musicians and tell them, hey, let's record some Mozart. So the first album was the early concertos, and then the later one, the piano concertos number 22 and number 24 from the later period of Mozart. So this Sudama was basically the first orchestra that I could completely experiment with, and as you know, as we all know, these first years as conductor, you truly don't realize what this profession is all about. You have all these ideas, but it's actually so many other things than what you think. So, these first experiences with people that I knew kind of gave me a little cushion before the profession becomes much more intense and brutal. But these first years of working as conductor with musicians that I love, it was just a great start, and it made me understand a lot of things that I hadn't realized at that point about conducting.
Before we leave New York and go to the middle of Europe, which we're going to any minute now, a question has just popped into my head, because it is about that learning process early on. But I'm assuming something here, and hopefully you'll agree with me, but if you don't, I'll be interested in your answer. Because your first steps into conducting were through play directing, playing as soloist and directing the orchestra at the same time, I'm assuming, also because you're playing with friends there, I'm assuming you learned to trust the orchestra very, very, very early on. something that some conductors, when they're studying just conducting, I know that sounds like a terrible thing to say, but that learning that level of trust is something they find hard. As a soloist, you've got no choice. You have to trust the orchestra whilst you're being the soloist. And then coming in and out of those tutti areas where you're not playing, again, you have to trust the concertmaster or the leader or whoever needs to bring in the orchestra. Am I right in thinking that early on, you've got that, you have to trust them, because if you don't, there's no way it can work?
Absolutely. I mean, you're raising such an important point and such a key issue in our profession. The matter of trust. I mean, I believe today that this is what it's all about.
Yeah.
This is truly what can make a conductor successful or maybe a total failure. Because having great technique, of course, it's important, and having energy and inspiration and knowledge, all of this is a given. Of course, we need it. And without all of that, we cannot succeed. But trust, and I would add to that respect.
Yes, yeah.
Trusting the orchestra and respecting the musicians, and not being the one to impose your vision and that's it. If you can trust the people who are around you, I think you already achieved maybe 80% of the rehearsal. And as you mentioned, and I find that to be 100% true, as a soloist, when you play with the orchestra, you have to trust them. You have no choice, because they are the one to support you. They are the one to accompany you. They are the one who are going to follow you to heaven or to hell. But you need them. And if you don't trust them, if you don't respect them, you can be the best pianist in the world. Your performance will be no good. So I think indeed that having these beginnings as a soloist, and opening that door instead of, as you said, the kind of traditional conducting classes, I would say that this really taught me about, because as I say many times to musicians in the orchestra, I come from your world. I am an instrumentalist like you guys. I know what it is to be there, to study your score before orchestra rehearsal, to put your markings in your score, to need to count rhythm during rehearsals, to be stressed out before a concert. I know all these things, and I really think that this is what gives you that kind of trust towards musician, and it's always been very helpful.
Well, the analogy I would use, and I've used it occasions on this podcast, but I'm going to use it again, is that really as a conductor, we're riding a horse. And the best conductors are the ones who let the horse run, but knowing that they're needed to help the horse jump over a stream or jump over a fence, and occasionally so be holding the reins enough so that if the horse sees a rabbit or a dog and wants to run to the left or the right, or to be skittish, then to hold the reins and to help them through that moment. But the point is, you're not telling the horse how to run, because the horse knows how to run. The horse knows how to trot, it knows how to jog, it knows how to jump, but sometimes it needs you to help it, to tell it, jump now, and that's our job.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with that. And I would add to that one more thing, because we were talking about the New York period. One thing that was crucial to me, and it also addresses this point of yours. During that time in New York, I spent a lot of my nights in jazz clubs. I spent a lot of my time getting to know jazz musicians, blues musicians, world music musicians, and especially this is the period where I completely discovered the world of improvisation and the world of jazz. And I think that this notion of trusting your fellows, if you are a jazz pianist in a jazz trio, and you have your drummer and your double bass player, and you're going to do kind of a crazy improvisation, if you don't trust these guys around you to be there for you, to hold the chords, to really give you all these colors that you need and the rhythm, you're not going to make it happen. And all these nights that I spent in jazz clubs during that New York period, it also taught me so much about trusting and about how much this openness of the jazz world is so important also in our classical world.
Well, that sounds terrible. Spending nights in jazz clubs in New York. How bad for you? And learning whilst doing it. Well, let's go to a different city, which has maybe not got quite as good a nightlife as New York, but it's still a wonderful place because I love it. In 2009, you become music director of the Geneva Chamber Orchestra. And then in 2013, you start or founded the Geneva Camerata, of which you're the music director and artistic director now. An orchestra well known for its projects being, as you've said earlier on, slightly left of center or slightly off the wall. I mean, you as a pianist, you've done things like playing all of the Mozart sonatas in a marathon back to back. I can't remember how many hours that took you. And also putting the music of Scarlatti next to John Cage. And so what sort of things have you done with your orchestra in Geneva? How did you start it? Would you just decide, right, I want to start my own orchestra? But how do you go about starting it? I'm assuming you needed to find funders or people interested in helping you.
Yeah, so I mean, it came at a time where I had already been conducting orchestras for quite a certain amount of time, maybe 10 years or so, and I was getting more and more experience in the conducting world, making some debuts here and there. I came to the realization that for the kind of projects that I really wanted to do, these kind of very wild projects in which different worlds come together, creating encounters between different styles, between different genres. This is really one of the things I was most interested in. Also, it is a time where I started being really involved both in contemporary music, but also in Baroque music on period instruments. And so all these things were happening at that time of my life. And I thought that if I want to go further, if I really want to give life to some projects that I had in my mind, it would require a different kind of tool, a different kind of organization. Because as you know, with traditional orchestras, so to speak, symphony orchestras, these are in general very rigid organizations. These are, I mean, even if they are incredible and amazing in their quality, the symphony orchestra is really an entity that has its roots in the 19th century, in the past, and it's not very flexible. And it's difficult to change things. And it's difficult to propose daring and audacious projects. It's just orchestras are not built for that. Maybe it will change in the future, but right now, early 21st century, it's still this way. So one way that seemed obvious to me would be to create a new orchestra that would address this issue of how to offer the public more daring projects. And the purpose, of course, would have to be also make classical music more available, more accessible, because it is my strong belief that through these daring and audacious projects, you don't just do it because you want to do it or because you want to be interesting or because it's cool. You do it because if you want to do it, it needs a good reason. And for me, the good reason would be because I felt that classical music was still not touching enough young people or enough audience members that believe that, and I would say rightly so, that classical music is for a certain elite. And I thought this was not the only way to address it, but it is one way. If you offer projects that convince people that they are different, cooler, more accessible, more interesting, less old school, then you can bring a new audience into the concert hall. And this was the purpose. And, to make a long story short, of course, it required a lot of very hard work at the start, and fundraising, and finding cultural foundations that would agree to sponsor this kind of project. But it also required many other things, not just, Geneva is a very cultured city that has a lot of classical music, amazing orchestras already, concert halls, concert series. It's a well-known city for classical music already. So it also required to find a new audience in a city that's already saturated with classical music. But more importantly, maybe the most important, was how to find musicians that would be willing to take any kind of risk. Really, anything that you want to ask them. And also musicians who would agree to improvise jazz, musicians who would agree to play in the same concert a very complex contemporary piece by, I don't know, Boulez or Ligeti, and in the same concert switch to Baroque instruments and play a piece by Purcell on period instruments, and at the same time maybe collaborate with a choreographer. So you need to find musicians who agree to do that. And this was the process, maybe the most intense process at the beginning, was to find these 45 musicians who have this ability and who want to devote their life to these kind of unusual risk-taking projects. And to answer also the last part of your question, the kind of projects that I would say we take pride in the most, beyond hosting extraordinary soloists, like, many orchestras who play soloists who play well-known concertos. But I think that the projects in which we really take pride in are the projects that are collaborations with other disciplines and with other artistic forms. So just to give you an example, a very recent example, because that's the best I could give. Very recently, we performed Dvorak's New World Symphony, entirely choreographed. So what happened was that the orchestra played the New World Symphony completely by memory, and at the same time dancing. All the musicians were dancing while playing on a new choreography that was created especially for us, for the Geneva Camerata. And so you had on stage 50 musicians who were performing Dvorak's Ninth and dancing, and it was the wildest thing that you could imagine. We have been touring, well, now we had COVID on our way, but just before that, we had been touring for the past 3 years with a wonderful project called Dance of the Sun, in which the orchestra dances on pieces by Lully and on Mozart's Symphony Number 40. And that's another project with contemporary dance. It involves also theater. So our musicians are required to be musicians, actors, dancers. We welcome a lot of well-known jazz musicians. Our musicians improvise with them. So this is just, kind of the tip of the iceberg, just to give you a few examples of the kind of things we love to do.
Well, I'm not surprised that people find it interesting, because I'm nodding away and smiling and thinking, wow, how do you do that? Also because you're trying to take the music to a new audience, but also if you take that to an old audience, that's new to them. So I'm not surprised that people are interested in fundraising or helping you with the funds. And another point to bring up is the fact that when I joined the profession in 1991, it was probably the back end of, you were a symphony orchestra musician, and that was it.
Mhm.
already then education and going into schools and speaking to children about educating music was coming in. Already then, symphony orchestras like the CBSO that I was playing in were expected to play it in a period instrument way, or at least know some of the ways of doing it. They were expected to play it no vibrato. So actually, from about then onwards, musicians have sort of been expected to add more than one string to their bow,
Absolutely.
to have an interest in improvisation, to have an interest in educating or being an educator, to have an interest in maybe presenting concerts, to have an interest in conducting. The days of just being a second fiddle player in a symphony orchestra and doing nothing
Absolutely.
else are probably gone. So I'm not surprised it took you some time to find 45 musicians who are willing to do all those things. But I'm also not surprised that you did find them, because the world has changed to the point where musicians now are much more open to doing these things.
Yeah, and I always mention this, that when I arrived to Juilliard in 1998, there was no jazz department and there was no Baroque on period instrument department. By the time I left, after I did my master's, there was the most amazing jazz department led by Wynton Marsalis, the great jazz trumpet player. And there was also they were about to open the Baroque department, which is now led by William Christie from Les Arts Florissants. So, the world, as you said, the world has completely changed in the last 20 years. And I completely agree with that. Musicians cannot anymore only just play their instrument and that's it. They have to have at least some kind of understanding and knowledge about contemporary music, about Baroque music, about jazz improvisation, and also about just other disciplines, dance, theater, acrobatics, many other things that seem to me essential to bringing new audiences to our concert hall. And this is maybe the key. These collaborations with other disciplines are maybe the key, for me at least, to having a better future for classical music.
Away from Geneva, away from dealing with the camerata, I'm sure there's all sorts of administrative stuff you end up doing, let alone just performing. You guest conduct, which is where I'm speaking to you now. You're, as you said, you're in Hong Kong, you're about to give a piano recital and then conduct. When you first go to an orchestra as a guest conductor, the speed dating world that we end up a bit inhabiting, do you prefer the first time to go and play and conduct in the concert? Is it something that is normally asked of you when you first go and work with an orchestra? How often is your debut just conducting? It sounds like a horrible phrase, but it's a way of delineating it.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I would say that back in the days, some years ago, obviously I was known as a pianist more time that I had been conducting, because I'm a pianist before I'm a conductor. So I think the very first engagements, the first few years in my professional conducting career, definitely the majority of the orchestras were inviting me both as pianist and conductor. And then little by little, it started changing, and in the last few years, certainly, I would say I'm getting as many invitations as, so to speak, just conductor, as much as pianist and conductor. I will say something, I love as much, really equally, going to an orchestra as a conductor or as pianist and conductor. And now it's really, I would say, kind of equal between concerts in which I'm conducting and there's another soloist, or concerts in which I'm pianist and conductor. I love both. I love working with soloists, so both are fine with me. I will say two things about this. One is that it's true that sometimes when you go to a very well-known orchestra, kind of a prestigious orchestra, you're doing your debut, like what I'm about to do now with Hong Kong Philharmonic as we are speaking. Sometimes there's something very comforting as coming to a first rehearsal and doing both piano and conducting, because you can immediately, it relates to what we were speaking about before. It immediately puts me in kind of equality with the other musicians, because even physically speaking, we are all sitting down. I'm also sitting down at the piano, and we are all at the same height. So on all accounts, physically, socially, musically, artistically, we're kind of equal, and immediately it makes kind of the discussion much easier, I would say. As you very well know, sometimes as a conductor, you arrive to an orchestra. It can be, first time can be very, very difficult. Sometimes, stressful. Sometimes the connection is not what you had hoped for. The vision of the orchestra and your vision are very different. So coming to a first rehearsal as also pianist can be very nice. But as I said, I love both. The other thing I wanted to say is that the one aspect of my profession that I do less and less, in fact, is being a piano soloist and having a conductor conduct me. And it kind of happened naturally, so I still do a lot of piano recitals. I conduct with other soloists, and I conduct being pianist myself. But the one thing I do less and less is piano soloist in a concerto, having another conductor. And it happened in a natural way. I think it's not that I don't enjoy it. I still enjoy having, a great conductor, having a collaboration with a great conductor. It's just that now I've performed pretty much all of these concertos with myself conducting, even not just Mozart, Beethoven, like the usual suspect, but I've conducted and played the Ravel piano concerto, Rhapsody in Blue, Schumann piano concerto. So, even romantic and 20th century stuff I've done. So, and I love doing it. So in a way, I know exactly what I want to achieve. And I know, since we always have so little time with orchestras, and we're always wishing we could have more time to work, I know exactly how to get to the results that I would like to achieve. And sometimes having a conductor, it's not that it doesn't happen, but it just takes more time. And therefore, this is maybe one aspect of my activity that I've been doing a bit less in the last few years.
One question, I'm going to start this with a rather cynical statement, which does not apply to you, David, because you started pretty much from the get-go conducting and playing. So this cynical statement does not apply to you. But often you see soloists take up conducting at a certain point of their career, shall we say, almost like some sort of pension, so that when their solo playing career, they feel that it's come to a natural end, they can gently morph into being a conductor. As I said, that doesn't apply to you because you've been conducting all the time. But do you see a point in the future when the piano will start to take a backward step and you'll conduct more? Or eventually only conduct? Do you see that happening, or do you think the piano will always be there?
No, I don't see that happening in any kind of way. And I'll tell you, the reason I know that is that, in the last few years, there were seasons in which suddenly conducting took a much more important role, and I was, conducting more and playing less recitals. And I realized that I really love it equally, and I need both. This is what I would say nourishes me. This is what makes me, it makes me the artist that I am, to have these two very different, but at the same time, complementary aspects about my work. I don't want to give up the piano, even if, my conducting career went even further. I love playing the piano, and actually some of the craziest and wildest and weirdest ideas that I have for programs first come for the piano, because this is my natural habitat. This is where I grew up. This is my little secret garden. I am a pianist before I am a conductor, and as I love conducting, and having a career in conducting is a blessing, and I need it because it's a community, and I don't want to go back to the days where I was just solitary on the way, just playing recitals. I love being in a community. I love working with musicians in the orchestra. So it's just that piano is an important part of my life, and it will always be. And I don't see any kind of way that I would give it up.
I thought that would be the answer, but I thought I'd better check as well. A question I've asked every conductor pretty much is about score preparation. And I often ask the pianists, when you come to learn a new score, do you sit at the piano and use the piano, or do you sit at your desk and use your inner ear? And when you come to learn a new score, do you go from big to small, or do you start on page one and work your way through? Do you do what one conductor said to me recently, which was, I read page one and the last page, and then page two and the penultimate page, and I work my way in. And when you learn a new score, are you a scribbler? Do you use pencils, red, blue, and black colors? How do you go about it?
Yeah, so I'm quite a kind of a maniac about annotation and writing. I write everything. If you look at my scores, they're like extra annotated. Not just conducting scores, but piano scores too. I write everything. If I have ideas, my piano scores with fingerings, I have everything in there. It's my Bible. So to me, the pencil is an extremely important tool. I do use color pencils in my conducting scores, but actually I use it a lot in my piano scores as well. Yeah. So for sure I use more colors for my conducting scores, but I always wrote a lot. I have to say that for when I start learning a piece for an upcoming conducting project, I just love to sit at a table, just the score, my pencils, myself. I actually do not sit at the piano. Maybe it's because I spend enough hours at the piano already, and I and it's enough. But I just love to have this kind of moment of quiet when I start with a new piece from the beginning, clean, try to absorb it in my mind, in my, system, and just go through. I don't have kind of a rule about exactly how it really depends, so for a contemporary piece, I'll have my set of techniques, how to approach it. For a big romantic symphony, I will do it differently. And for a minimalistic Baroque piece, it will be different. I don't really want to have a set of rules, but I do love to start kind of clean, without any tools, just the score on a table and a few pencils, and that's it.
Great. Everybody has a different system, and that's been proven throughout the podcast. We've got people who never write anything, down to people with highlighter pens and God knows what. So yeah, absolutely. I agree with you also. There is that moment with a new score where you open it and just there's silence and then
it's a magical,
but
it's
then
a magical moment.
Your inner ear fills with what you think the score is telling you and what you think the composer has written. Yeah,
it's a magic. It's really that moment that you open a new score. It's just a magical moment, and I always cherish that moment, and I always want to keep it, very, very pure and very clean.
Is conducting still a bit of a mystery to you? Would you like to know some more? Well, you can find out all sorts of secrets, tips, opinions, and much more on my Patreon page. You can hear interviews with musicians, composers, soloists, and managers, and hear their thoughts on conducting. You can read my diaries when I go on guest conducting trips. You can take part in group meetings with other like-minded conducting fans. You can read articles on conducting and conductors. You can even have conducting lessons from myself. All of this is available at patreon.com/a mic on the podium. And from just £5 a month, which is less than a pint of beer in most cities, you can gain access to this ever-growing resource on conductors and conducting. Details and links to the page are in the show notes attached to this episode. Now, the all-important 10 questions with my guest, David Greilsammer. David, it's time for the 10 questions, and as it grows dark behind you in the skyline of Hong Kong, I shall ask you, what sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
So I think I recently discovered my very favorite sound in the world, very, very recently. I just, a few weeks ago, I was on tour in Latin America, performing some concerts, and I had a break between two concerts, and I was able to, it was a dream for many, many years to go to the Amazonas jungle. Somewhere on the border between Brazil, Colombia, and Peru. It's something I wanted to do for many years. And while I was there, I actually slept in the jungle in a little tree cabin, and falling asleep to the noise. I don't know if I should call it noise or sound, to the sound of the animals, insects. There was no light whatsoever, just these sounds of, especially the insects and the birds. I mean, I have to say, this is my new favorite sound in the world. And I think I slept so well. I haven't slept like that in a million years. So for sure, the jungle, the sound of the jungle insects, that has become my very, very favorite sound.
And a sound you don't like or even hate?
Yeah, I think I can say hate. Well, I think I would say motorcycles under my room when I try to fall asleep in my apartment. And where I live is very close to Geneva Lake, and there's a road with a lot of motorcycles, and that drives me absolutely nuts. Crazy, really crazy.
Well, I've said it before on this podcast, and we live on a very straight road. And it seems to be a road that late at night, either motorcycles or people with cars that have had their exhausts to be loud seem to love accelerating past our house.
Exactly. This drives me absolutely nuts. I haven't yet had the chance to take a bucket of water and kind of, like in the movies, to throw it, but I have started thinking about it.
If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
Yeah, I actually always try during tours to somehow find a day, or at least half a day, for my own kind of freedom and activities. What I love doing, especially in big cities, when I have a day off, is spend the whole day in museums. This is really my big passion, especially painting, and being in museums. It's really something of a necessity for me. It inspires me, immersing in colors and in shapes, especially with paintings of the great masters. I absolutely adore that, and it gives me the strength to continue on the tour. So any day free that I have, you can find me in the museum for sure.
Number 4. You can have more than one, or even just one, whatever you like. Can you name a favorite conductor of yesteryear?
I think I would say it's a difficult question. Speaking about conductors from the past, because I feel that times have just changed so much in terms of conducting.
Yes.
And for some reason, it's a more difficult question than if you were to ask me like a pianist from the past. There would be many names that would come to mind. But conductor from the past is more difficult. However, I would still answer Bernstein. Not, I mean, of course, amazing musician and amazing conductor, but more for his communicative power and his kind of love of people, his love of audiences, the way he communicated music to the audience. I mean, beyond the technique, you can like his technique, you can like his, interpretations of Beethoven, of Mahler, of, Brahms, all of that. But that's not so much what I want to talk about. It's really the way he made so many people love music, his lectures and his compositions and, the musical theater, and he was an amazing jazz improviser, and he really embodies to me the complete musician who understood that classical music by itself is maybe not enough, that we need to open doors to other aspects of art. And you can see that in his conducting, how much he wants to open these doors. So just for that, I absolutely adore him.
Well, possibly a harder question, as some conductors find it hard, some don't. And who would be a favorite current conductor? And are they similar to Bernstein?
I think, this is a great question about, current conductors. And one aspect that I have been thinking a lot about in the last few years that I think has been more and more discussed is the place of women conductors in our profession, because as we all know, conducting is one of those professions where it's only very recently that women have had really this space to emerge. And if you look 20, 30, 40 years ago, there were almost no women conductors, and this is a big deal. And so I think that today, if you ask me about the current conductors that I admire, I would like to mention some women conductors that I absolutely adore, and that I think that are doing not only an amazing job in their profession and who are excellent conductors, but these are conductors that have opened the doors to, I think, many girls to believe in themselves and to say, yes, it has been a profession, a male profession for years, but it doesn't have to be anymore. And I'm a strong believer in this, glass ceiling that needs to be, shattered, and that this profession needs to belong also to more women conductors. And so I would mention for sure somebody incredible who is Barbara Hannigan, who is a soprano, of course, but who has been leading a brilliant conducting career. She does incredible projects as conductor and with extraordinary energy. But, on the other end, I would mention as a Baroque conductor, Emmanuel Haïm. And I would mention two other extraordinary conductors, Susanna Malki and Marin Alsop, who have been doing extraordinary careers. And I think it hasn't been easy for these girls to kind of open these doors, even in our current world. And even after the Me Too movement, it's still not easy. So I'm full of admiration for these women conductors, and I hope there will be many, many more.
Well, I played for four, and agree with you, they're great conductors. I played for Emmanuel Haïm, Marin Alsop, and Susanna Malki. I've interviewed Marin on here and talked to her about her Tachy Concordia Fellowship, and it was a pleasure and a joy to chat to Marin. And dear Barbara, I know you'll be listening, because I interviewed Barbara early on in the podcast series, and she's an avid listener to the podcast. She's a real fan of it. So, and I agree with you. Some of her projects she does are absolutely amazing. And not only that, she finds time to be one of the greatest sopranos on the planet, and runs 3 mentorship programs. So she obviously likes keeping herself busy. But brilliant choices, absolutely wonderful choices. What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
I think that It's a great question, by the way. I think that at the time, for sure, now I've done it since then many, many times. But at the time, the most challenging work was the Ligeti violin concerto, which I was very lucky to do with Patricia Kopachinskaya, who's a friend and who's a wonderful soloist. And this piece is extremely difficult for two very different reasons. One, of course, is just technical. I think it's one of Ligeti's most complex pieces. And I'm, Ligeti to me is a god. I absolutely love Ligeti. He's one of my role models. I've recorded his music. I've played plenty of his music. He's on my latest album, Labyrinth, as well. Anytime you give me a Ligeti project, I'll take it on. So this music, the violin concerto, is extremely difficult technically, but the more difficult aspect of it is the theatrical and dramatic aspect of it, because while you're, as conductor, you're busy with this extremely complex rhythms and this polyrhythm. So you have all these complex separate rhythms happening at the same time. At the same time, this is the period of his life that he developed this extreme theatrical movement in which his music became more and more wild and dramatic and influenced by jazz as well. And so I found myself, the first time I conducted the Ligeti violin concerto, beyond the technicality, I found myself emotionally absolutely drained. And this was one of the most intense, I to this day, I remember that first time. I needed a break like for 2 weeks after that. But I have to say, since then I've conducted it on many occasions, and it has become one of my favorite pieces. I love it.
I remember vividly playing it. I've never conducted it. And actually, as a player, I used to always watch the conductor like mad and think what it must be like to conduct pieces. But I only ever played the Ligeti violin concerto once, and it was a complete shock to me that I did, because there are only 4-second violin parts. And that week I was sitting number 5, so I wasn't in it. And then I came into the concert on the last concert, and somebody said, "Oh, by the way, you're on. Number 4's number 4's gone."
Oh my God!
And I think we had a 30-minute seating rehearsal, which
I would be panicking like crazy.
Well, we had a 30-minute seating rehearsal, and I seem to remember it being Simon Rattle conducting, and he said, "Well, we've got to go through certain moments because Mike's sight reading it in the concert." I never, of course, Simon's beat was always there peripherally in my vision. I never took my eyes off the music. I was frightened to death. And so, it's a piece I think I ought to get to know as a conductor, maybe, rather than
fabulous.
As a frightened violinist. I know it's a fabulous thing. I've listened to it, but by God, absolutely.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Yeah, I love it.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
Well, that's an easy question for me, because as an Israeli, there are certain items of food that we don't travel without.
Right.
I have to say, and I am particularly a spicy food eater. I mean, chilies, spicy food, jalapenos, anything that is crazy spicy, I will eat. Like, on tour in restaurants, people know that even before I sit to eat, they need to bring the spicy sauce. So actually, now what I've come to do on many of my tours, if I don't forget when I pack, is to take some spicy sauce with me. And then I don't have any problem. I can just, right now, for instance, during my quarantine, I'm being brought food to my hotel room during this quarantine, and I have my spicy sauce. I can eat as much as I want, and I don't need to bother the people at the reception to bring more and more spicy sauce to my room. So traveling with spicy sauce. I also travel, you might find this very strange, but many Israelis do that. I travel with tahini. For those who don't know, tahini is sesame paste, and we Israelis, we eat that morning, noon, night, midnight, middle of the night. Tahini is like very important in in all our meals. So actually I've come to travel with it. And actually recently I when traveling and arrived way too late to the place that I needed to get to, like 3 a.m., no restaurants open, nothing open. And luckily I had my tahini in my bag, and this really saved my evening meal. So yeah, I try to travel with tahini and spicy sauce, and this really can save my life.
Well, I'm now looking forward to the answer to question 10 very much. But before then, we must do question 8. What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
I think that my biggest frustration in the conducting life is how little rehearsal time we have as conductors. Sometimes we are being asked to conduct the biggest masterpieces in music history in like a day and a half, or sometimes a day of rehearsals. Like sometimes I ask myself, how can you rehearse those great Brahms symphonies, Dvorak symphonies, Mahler symphonies with just a few hours of rehearsals? Sometimes I think, man, this really doesn't make any sense. So I would say that if I could change something about life as conductor, would be to have more time with the musicians of the orchestra, more time to rehearse these pieces. I think that this would be something that would make me extremely happy, just to have an extra day with the orchestra. It could make a big difference. Sometimes you get to the concert and you just think to yourself, I wish I had just an extra few hours to rehearse that piece. And that frustration sometimes can be a bit upsetting. I don't know how you feel about it, if you feel the same, but for me, it's really a big frustration sometimes.
I have rarely ever got to a concert and thought, this is, in fact, I've had too much rehearsal time. Hardly ever. If I have, it's normally with a conservatoire orchestra, very occasionally with an amateur orchestra who've given me as many rehearsals as I've asked for, very, very occasionally, and super occasionally with a professional orchestra where I think to myself, oh, yeah, we could have, I do often sometimes finish rehearsals early, but then that's because I think the energy's left the room rather than I don't think there are things I could fix.
Of course,
but yeah, it's this to have more time to go at a pace that is not so frantic.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word.
If people turn around to me and say, "But Mike, you've always finished rehearsals early," it's because the energy's left the room, and if I carried on, that all goodwill would be lost. You do as much as you can in the time available, and sometimes you think, right, that's it, it's time to finish early. But when I've worked, for instance, in Germany, where I've got an extra day, and you just think, well, I can spend half an hour on this problem rather than the 7 minutes I might have if I'm doing it in the UK. And then that problem will never come back. And it's just having more time to be relaxed about the rehearsal process, isn't it? That's what it is.
Absolutely.
Well, number 9. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt or have liked to have had a go at?
Well, for the people who know me well, they know one of my greatest passions is cooking. This is something I do all the time when I'm at home, not on tour. I cook and I prepare meals that either for my loved ones or for friends or for people around me. I'm absolutely passionate about it. Any cuisine, whether it's French, Italian, Asian, Israeli, Mediterranean, American. So I would say, to answer the question, I think if I had a chance one day to have my own little restaurant with my own creations as a cook, as a chef, I think I would have enjoyed. I know it's a very difficult profession as well, but at least in my mind, I think I would have liked to give this a try. A nice little restaurant with a beautiful view on the ocean or a lake, and some very, very unique dishes. I would love to give it a try, but yeah, this is really, cooking is something that, when I come back from a rehearsal, many times I'm, as we all are, really drained and completely out of energy after a long day of rehearsals, especially, if you rehearse a big piece with an orchestra. And cooking has always been something that has relaxed me tremendously. Not just eating, but really spending an hour or two or more cooking. And it's something that keeps me balanced in my, in my touring life.
Well, therefore, I said earlier when you answered number 7, and you've just answered number 9 about chefing and cooking. So therefore, number 10 is, if the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Well, I'm going to answer with a very, very, very simple answer. I am Israeli. And I think if you ask maybe 90% of Israelis might give you the same answer as I will. Our life is not complete without a plate of hummus. This is, we live for the moment of eating hummus. So I'm pretty sure that my very last meal, I know it's not very complex. It's something very simple, but a good, real, homemade hummus with delicious pita bread that has been homemade. This, to me, is the ultimate kind of last supper, should I say. Of course, with a lot of chilies and spicy sauce.
I was going to say, yeah.
Of course, that, with a little glass of excellent French red wine. I think that, to me, is the ultimate meal.
That sounds great. That sounds absolutely great. And it looks by the window behind you that it's almost time for you to eat in Hong Kong. It's gone. We started this interview in daylight and it's now pretty much dark of night. I've had a wonderful hour or so chatting, David. It's been wonderful to meet you, chat with you. And I hope very soon we can meet up.
Absolutely. And maybe work together as well.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Well, for those listeners who might do their homework, we do share a manager, so hopefully that we'll Sarah will put us together somewhere. But it would be lovely to meet you and chat to you and carry on this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with a conductor who, after studying in Paris and London, has gone on to have a highly successful career. This year, she starts as Chief Conductor and Artistic Director with the Canberra Symphony Orchestra, back home in her native Australia. But until then, bye-bye.